Hi, I'm Diana.
And I'm Zach.
And we're the Farriers Fellows, a podcast dedicated to bringing you games and tools to take your adventures further.
We're going to be talking about non-traditional indie RPGs, some that have been around for years, others that are newer, to take you beyond the ordinary.
Today, join us as we lay on hands in Dogs in the Vineyard.
Our first segment is The Call to Adventure. Dogs in the Vineyard is a game by D. Vincent Baker. The edition that we were playing was released in 2004. This is a fantasy western style game. It was, I think, pretty popularly cited as a Forge game.
Yeah.
It won Indie RPG of the Year in 2004 from the Indie Game Awards, and in 2005 it was nominated for a Diana Jones Award for Excellence in Gaming. This was a hugely revered game. Even when I first came to gaming in, I want to say like 2009, like between the years of 2009 and I think my first PAX East was 2012, I was aware of and kind of infatuated by the concept of this game.
Yeah.
And I didn't actually get around to playing it until 2019.
I would agree with your infatuation of this game. I feel like everybody I knew who played games knew at least about Dogs in the Vineyard.
Mm-hmm. So, Dogs in the Vineyard is a game about fantasy, allegorically Mormon paladins in the Wild West. As a dog of the King of Life, it is your responsibility to interpret the King of Life's will and intent and enact his law on the territories and the towns of the hard-fought West. Dogs in the Vineyard is a game about religious statehood, having absolute power in deciding what to do with it. Dogs can be mediators or killers, eliminating the root of a town's sin in whatever way they see fit, without consequences within the community. And that's the really important bit, is that your word is law. Conflicts use a poker-like dice system, use traits and equipment to see and raise others' offers. But when talking stops working and the only way to raise is with fists or your guns, the game asks, what do you do?
And so the game does that through some mechanical features. Stats, traits, and gear are all valued by a number and a pool of dice. So you might have a gun that's worth 2d8 and a pony that's worth 1d4, while your ability to be insightful is worth 4d6. When a conflict breaks out, you're going to rule that pool of relevant stats. So then the players are going to take turns raising one another the value of pairs of dice. When a player can't see that raise, they either forfeit the conflict, they call on some unused trait or some gear, or they escalate the conflict to something more dangerous. So if you were having a verbal conflict, now you're punching each other. Or all of a sudden you remember that you've got this really awesome bat in your gear. Or
So did you just say bat?
Bat. Like a baseball bat? For gear? I don't know. It was an example. It was an off-the-cuff example.
Right.
I suppose my pony would be more useful. Your pony shows up all of a sudden. I don't know. This is an example. It was an off-the-cuff example. I wasn't thinking that far ahead when I was using an example.
Okay. So, Diana, what are some things that you liked about this game?
I really liked that the players had no HP. I thought that was really interesting. So you've got these dice, you're doing these like poker-like battles, but you're not, you are worried about your health, but you're not really worried about your health. You're just kind of going into the battles, and I thought that was really cool.
Yeah, so there's no HP, there's no conditions.
Right.
Instead, based on your inability to see a raise, so say you have to use more than 2 dice to see a raise, you start accruing fallout. And fallout is basically the damage that you take at the end of the conflict. Mm-hmm. And the only way for your character to die is to engage in a gunfight and get the maximum amount of fallout dice. So it's actually really hard for your character to die, but over the course of the game, they're going to be taking damage to their stats through fallout. They might be earning new traits through their fallout, like limp leg or, nasty scar, 1d6, right? That are not necessarily going to hinder you as much as they are going to add flavor to your character. So there's no yeah, like you said, no HP. Instead, you're growing
Right.
rather than at risk of dying.
Right, yeah. And I thought it's a really simple twist, but it is a really important twist because you are this paladin coming in and no harm can really come to you socially from you doing your thing. Like, you're just going to do your thing and you're going to murder whoever you feel like you need to murder or do something else. And this society is going to be like, yep, they did the right thing. Like, I don't know. I think it's a really interesting mechanic that gets the player into the mindset of, I'm not worried about my physical corporeal body. Like, I'm just going to grow as a person and I'm just going to be more badass as I continue on. And I just thought the no HP was interesting.
Yeah. I like that you are mechanically encouraged to try to solve problems non-violently first.
Mm-hmm.
So you get more dice over the course of a conflict if you start off trying to be non-violent, if you try to talk it out. And then if you can't win the argument, escalating to fists. And then if you can't win the fight, drawing your gun. You are mechanically de-incentivized to come in guns blazing.
Right.
It is far more advantageous to try to talk it out first, which I think is a really interesting move when you take into account the rest of the game. I think it fits into the genre very well of like spaghetti western Wild West, and I think it also makes your characters more interesting, right? In that they are trying to be more priests than they are gunslingers.
Yeah, I agree. So you just went into this like really awesome, I don't know, thing that you liked. It was really well thought out. And mine is just, my other thing is I really liked the rating scale that you use when you're creating your inventory. So you don't just make up the stats for it. You have to use a little bit of your creativity to decide if your thing is big. Is it excellent? Is it big and excellent? Is it like shoddy? Is it not good? And then depending on those descriptors, you get certain dice with it. And I really liked that because, as I've mentioned before, I sometimes feel like I struggle a little bit with creativity. And so that puts a nice little, it gives me a sandbox to play with, but I know where my boundaries are. Like, I can make whatever I want for my inventory, but it has to fit one of those things. It has to be big. It has to be excellent. It has to be, it's not shoddy, but I forget the other word. It has to be average. Like, it has to fit within those adjectives. And I liked that mechanic a lot. It allowed for a lot of creativity and a lot of diverse inventory within our party. Yeah,
because you could have anything. You just had to stat it out based on those ramifications.
Right.
I also like the system of valuing your gear, traits, and stats. It feels maybe like, and especially when I think you're first reading it, and if you're hearing about us talking about it now for the first time, that might sound like it's very arbitrary. Like, what does it mean to have acuity 2d8? Might sound very arbitrary and hard to wrap your head around. But in play, and once you're like making your characters, you're like, okay, I have a really big, excellent horse, and they are 2d8, and I have eyeglasses that are really shoddy, and they're scratched up, and they're 1d4. And those aren't, nothing is so much a hindrance as it is less advantageous. Mm-hmm. And even though you can think of like your crappy gear or your 1d4 traits, your negative traits, as hindrances in the sense that they're probably going to gunk up your hand the same way that like in a deck builder, bad cards like fill up your hand, they're still contributing to your conflict. You still are encouraged to try to narratively incorporate your scratched up glasses into the conflict. So the rating system, while it might feel a little abstract when you're hearing about it, in play, it actually, it feels very clear. It feels very clean. And I like that a lot.
Yeah, I agree. Anything else that you liked?
I liked the accomplishment portion of character creation. So when you go through character creation, you basically decide, what your characters like in general. And there's an important bit of the lore where when the dogs are being trained, once they've been selected to be a dog, they are sent to the temple. And there they overgo a several month-long combination seminary school and boot camp where the elder dogs are trying to weed out the newbies. And when you start play, you are a dog. So we know you're a dog. What we do at the end of character creation is we set up a conflict based around something that you hope you accomplished during that boot camp. And depending on whether you fail or succeed that conflict, you're going to get a new trait. So we had one player wanted to prove that they were the most pious. And so we set them up with an elder dog who just didn't believe in them and like kind of put them in a no-win situation. And based on their failure, they were able to get a new trait. And I think that is a really good way to lead players into the conflict system, as well as build up their characters in a way that is quick and gives you a real connection to your character early in character creation.
Oh, I agree. I feel like I got a much better handle on who my character was during that stage of play, right at the very beginning. I feel like I had this concept, but once I started playing her, I was like, oh, this makes way more sense. I'm getting a better understanding of her. I really like the setting that this game is in. You don't explore Mormon Wild West in very many games. I tend to play a lot of fantasy games with dragons, high fantasy, and this is not that. But it could, I mean, maybe not dragons, but it kind of could be. It kind of left that up there. I don't know. Like things get wonky in your town, and it's kind of weird, and I liked it. I don't know. I enjoyed exploring this setting in the game, and especially because I don't explore these settings in my games. It was just nice to play this game and explore that setting.
I don't think I've ever played a Westward Expansion game or a Cowboys game until Dogs in the Vineyard. So it was interesting. It was fun, and I also really like the setting. And the game gives you a ton of backgrounding on the setting. It gives you a lot of background on like this fantasy Deseret, fantasy Utah, that really helps you understand where all the characters are coming from and what's going on in the setting and why the dogs feel that their jobs are so important. Going along with that, I really like, from the GM side, town creation. So each session, the GM is creating a mystery or a problem in a town that the dogs are going to come to. They need to unearth the problem, and they need to solve it. So town creation sees through, the GM takes every step on the progression of the sin in the town. And the idea is that sin eventually leads to injustice, which eventually leads to demonic possession and sorcery, and which will eventually lead to the downfall of the whole town or even the whole territory. So what the dogs are doing is very important. And as a GM, you figure out your town, you figure out what the source of the sin is, and then you play it through to its logical or illogical conclusion if the dogs never showed up. So you look at every stage, from who is experiencing pride, who commits a sin, what does that sin lead to, like what injustice is there, all the way to like how would the town eventually fall to demonic possession. And then when the dogs arrive, you just plop them in wherever you think that would be most interesting along that timeline. Where would it be most interesting to see the dogs try to solve the problem?
Okay.
I think that it's really fun, it's really engaging, and it's really interesting to build the problem.
I agree. It was super interesting coming into the town, and as the dog, you know sin is happening, but you don't really know much else than that, and figuring out that mystery was a lot of fun, and it was really interesting, and even during the parts where I wasn't in the scene or I wasn't acting, I was still highly engaged in the story because everything was a clue to this end goal. And it was interesting to experience on the other end of it.
How about you? Anything?
Because of the way that the mechanics of the conflicts work out, where you start least physical to most physical, like the importance of the arguments and the amount of arguments and the way that the arguments work because of the poker system, I was captivated by these arguments every time we had one. It was amazing. Like, regardless of my involvement in it, like, I'm captivated in, like, let's say you and I are rolling for an argument and I have the high dice first time, like I win that point in that bit of the argument, but then you win the next bit of the argument and then we go back and forth, or maybe I'm just dominating you. And then honestly, I was fascinated. I was just so hooked into these arguments. It was so interesting. And like 90% of our gameplay was the argument. That's as far as it went. At the very end, it went a little further, but it didn't go much further than that other than argument. And it was so, so interesting.
Yeah, I love the way this does social conflicts. Yeah, we played for 5, maybe going on 6 hours.
Yeah.
We had one gunfight and one like wrestling match, and a couple verbal conflicts that all went the way it breaks down each like part of the argument, the way that you present your argument and you raise, and then someone has to deflect your argument by seeing and then present their counter argument by raising again. Mm-hmm. It makes these really engaging cinematic arguments, and it encourages you to role play out those arguments in a way that felt very good to me.
Yeah, I agree.
One last thing of setting that I really enjoyed, that I thought was really fun to work with, was that in the setting there's an emphasis on intuition. So in the religion of the King of Life, everyone has stewardship over people in their lane, right? Mm-hmm. And they're supposed to stay in their lane. So it's also it's a very conservative religion. So the men have stewardship over their families, and the stewards of a town have stewardship over their congregation, and or rather over the families in their congregation. And then the regional stewards have stewardship over their region, their territory. And everyone is leading by intuition, and everyone believes, or in the setting it is canonical, that the King of Life guides you through intuition. So dogs are chosen by intuition, and dogs act on intuition in order to find what the King of Life wants them to do to solve the problem, which is why... So dogs have stewardship over the entire congregation. It's not their job to keep individuals safe or to keep families safe. It's their job to keep the congregation safe. Mm-hmm. They are acting on their intuition, and their intuition is infallible, so no one can question their intuition. They can hate the results. They can hate the dogs or, hate their judgment, but they have to acknowledge, if they are people of the faith, that the dogs acted with intuition that was given to them by God, which makes this very dangerous and powerful power dynamic that everyone at the table is playing with and trying to use. And as a GM, that is a lip-smackingly delicious minefield of, well, I was acting on the intuition that the King of Life gave me to save these families. And how dare you say yours is like, it's so good and powerful that intuition is a key component of the faith, because it's so nebulous and you can play with it in so many ways. It's beautiful. Yeah.
As a Diana player, all I do is act on intuition. So this just went really well with me. It made it really easy for me to play this game. But I know for another player of ours, it was a crucial part of their character development was trusting their intuition and going along with their intuition. And so I thought it was cool. It was really cool to see. The only thing I had a question about, and I feel like there's a very clear-cut answer to this, but I'm just going to say my question anyway. The game is really front-loaded. We spent a lot of time on our accomplishments and getting our accomplishments at the very beginning. And that serves a clear purpose. My question isn't about why do we do that, but it took us a really long time. And my question is there a way to speed that up? Because it took us a really long time to get through it. Of the 5, almost 6 hours that we played, a huge chunk of that was character creation and the accomplishments. And I started getting a little bored at the very beginning, and it quickly went away because the game got very interesting. And I just don't know if there's a way to speed that up. And I don't know if it's because we were playing the game for the very first time, or if it's because that's just how long it takes.
Yeah, I'm sure that there is a way to speed it up, but I think that my gut reaction to that is that I don't think this is a one-shot game. I think this is really a game meant to be played in a campaign.
I agree.
And I think in those types of games, having a very long, protracted character creation as like a session 0 is more acceptable.
Yeah, that's true.
But I do wonder how you could speed it up for one-shots other than just doing pre-gen characters, which I think would probably be my other solution.
Yeah.
I have a really big question about this game, and I kind of don't want to get into it until we approach the Inmost Cave. It's more of a story question than a mechanical question. Anytime we had mechanical questions, we were able to find them in the text pretty easily. So I'm going to save my questions for our next segment.
Okay. Changing it up.
Is there anything else that stood out to you?
Nothing different, but the conflict mechanic in this game really stuck with me. Like, I really enjoyed it, and I wish other games used it. I don't know how they would do that successfully. I just really enjoyed the conflict mechanic. I really enjoyed the escalation. I really enjoyed how we did the conflicts. That just really really stuck with me.
Yeah, I guess reiterate that this was a game that we spent mostly with the dogs, going around the town, investigating the issue, and interviewing and interrogating people was the majority of the game. And this wasn't an emergent mystery. This was a mystery that I knew the answer to going in as the GM. And even doing so, I thought that the mystery worked really well.
I agree. Hands down, yeah.
And part of that was because we had this very good social conflict mechanic that allowed us to go back and forth and determine whether or not you were going to get anything out of the individual. Mm-hmm. Most of this session was spent talking, and it was one of the best RP heavy sessions I've had in a game that is mechanical to this extent.
Yeah.
Like, we've had good RP heavy games with games that are very like bare bones that are just like presenting prompts for you to roleplay. Mm-hmm. This wasn't that. This is a mechanical game that really encourages roleplay through the setting and through the way the mechanics encourage you to roleplay.
Yeah.
It was great.
It was great. It was so fun to play with.
Should we approach the Inmost Cave?
We are now approaching the Inmost Cave.
All right. So.
Hold on.
Mm-hmm.
Before we start.
Yes.
This game, after we played it, you wrote an essay.
I sat down and I wrote out my, approach the Inmost Cave section. I didn't write an essay. I wrote 700 words about my feelings about this game.
We're not in school anymore. 700 words is an essay.
I had a lot of feelings after this game.
Mm-hmm.
So, full disclosure, we played a scenario called Willow Bluff. Willow Bluff can be found in the Gauntlet's Codex Love 2 issue, and it is written by Sydney Icarus. And I modified it a little bit, but I kept the core problem the same. And I don't want to get into spoilers or talk about too much about what it was, but I will say that the core of this scenario asks the dogs to enforce some pretty horrendous ideology based in conservative religious thought.
Yes.
Is that fair?
That is fair. That is accurate. Without giving too much away, yeah.
So, this game is at its core talking about religious zealotry and religious extremism, religious authoritarianism. And I knew that going in because it's right there on the box, right? Mm-hmm. You are God's watchdogs, making sure that everyone is acting in accordance with the faith, because we have evidence that the faith is real in this setting, that demons exist and that they prey on pride and injustice, and that if the dogs don't do their job, that lives are at stake. Whole towns are at stake if the dogs don't do their job. And so I have always seen this game as a game in which the point and the appeal is the disconnect between what a character does and what the player wants to do, right? Yeah. Mm-hmm. As players, we recognize that the things that our characters are doing are painful and abhorrent and morally wrong, right? But in the setting that they're right. So the idea is that there's this disconnect, there's this pain that comes from making your character do something that you don't want to do. Mm-hmm. And that's sort of the idea that I've always had about this game, is that that's kind of like the core thought, right? That your characters are, that you're having these gunfights and these mysteries and you're solving mysteries, and that's all kind of fun. But when it comes down to making your calls, there's this painful disconnect between player and character.
Absolutely.
That the game is toying with.
Yep.
And we absolutely experience that.
Yes. One of the players at the table guessed pretty early on what the ending was, and we were like, no, it wouldn't be that. It couldn't be that. And then he gets to it, and we're like, okay, cool, you guessed it. That was awesome. But now we have to deal with this, and we have to do things that we as people are not okay with, but that we as players, not players, but we as characters have to do because we believe so strongly in them. And I will tell you, I struggled so hard with it that I found a loophole. Like, I found a loophole in the game that I just didn't participate actively in the thing.
I don't think that's a loophole. I think that's intentionally available to you, is to not engage. And so here's my question.
Okay.
My question is, as players of Dogs in the Vineyard, are our characters supposed to engage with the terrible things that we as players disagree with? Or is the intent of this game for the dogs to rebel against the faith?
I don't think it's that you're supposed to rebel against the faith.
That's what I thought. But I have found, my question is, how much gameplay can you actually get out of that? Because I will admit that I felt terrible after our game.
Yeah.
I felt terrible to the point that I didn't know if I liked the end of our game.
The end of our game was awesome. It was terrible and it was awesome.
So I thought that we were going to play like 310 to Yuma, and we ended up playing like a Nicholas Winding Refn film like Valhalla Rising or Drive. Mm-hmm. It was dark. Yeah. It was really dark. Yeah. Other games have attempted to explore this, right? So Warhammer 40k is a very similar premise. You are playing as Inquisitors in a setting in which sin or magic or demonic influence is very real and can influence people and take control of them and can result in whole planets dying. So you are doing terrible things in the name of the Inquisition in order to ostensibly keep planets safe. And it's, again, this sort of disconnect between your religiously authoritarian characters and the players who have to do terrible things because in this setting, those terrible things are right. Mm-hmm. There's also the very famous Goblin Babies dilemma that I know Jason Cordova talked about on Fear of a Black Dragon a few months ago, I think at this point, which is, as adventurers, your job is to slay goblins, but if you find a den of goblin babies, what do you do? Right. Because eventually they're going to grow up to be terrible monsters. And Jason talks about how that is, and I agree, it's an argument in bad faith, right? Because it's just forcing you to do terrible things under weird pretenses. And I wonder if Dogs in the Vineyard, I wonder how we are supposed to consolidate that with Dogs in the Vineyard. Because Dogs feels like a game that is made for campaign play. It is presenting a setting in which the faith is correct in its conservatism. Pride leads to injustice, injustice leads to sin, sin leads to demonic possession. And in this setting, one where not acting in accordance with the faith could result in the death of an entire town or territory, the dogs are particularly zealous. They are called to service in childhood by God themselves, proven worthy in a crucible boot camp seminary school, and then given ultimate authority. They are zealots, and as players were given very little room to plant the seeds of doubt in the character's mind. One thing that I found that I do not know how canonical or how much Word of God to place this in, but I did find Vincent Baker talking about the game on Reddit and saying that part of the point of the game is that he would hope. So he says, the game asks the GM to pretend to agree with the faith's shitty archaic rules for purposes of town creation. The faith expects the PCs to enforce its shitty archaic rules. The game doesn't. The game hopes that the PCs, the characters, kick the faith to pieces. And I don't know where to plant that seed of doubt in the characters. Based on the setting, they are so ingrained that I'm not sure how to reconcile their zealotry. And I have very sincere concerns about the long-term effects of a game like Dogs in the Vineyard. It is no secret that Warhammer 40K has an issue with authoritarianism and fascism in its fan base. Mm-hmm. Because you are presenting a game, and the idea of the game is that there's this disparity, but you're still presenting a game in which you're doing terrible things in the name of religious authoritarianism. So I wonder about how to keep Dogs in the Vineyard, how to make it last long term and be in good faith, and make sure that the players are in good faith and are exploring the issues without taking joy in the premise.
I get that. I don't know. I don't know that there's an easy answer. I will tell you that when I imagine long-term play, I see the characters questioning their faith. Like, I see that as just part of long-term play. With more and more instances, especially if the mysteries are like the one that we played, I will see players start to be like, I cannot play this character like this in this instant. I've done it too many times now. Like, as a player, I'm exhausted, and so I'm going to put my own beliefs on this character for right now. And that's when I think you start bringing in that doubt. That's how I imagine. I really did. That's how I imagined it, is that every player at some point would just be like, I can't. And so as a player, I'm going to do this thing as a player, and I don't really care if that's what my character would do, because I can't.
And so I wonder the same thing. I wonder if part of our problem was that we started with Willow Bluff. That was a huge, hard thing.
Yeah.
And since it was the first session, it was our first time with those characters, we had no reason for our characters to rebel against their faith and their upbringing.
Right.
But if this had been like y'all's 6th to 10th mission, and first ones were like dealing with a bootlegger who was selling illegal alcohol, dealing with like someone dealing with prostitution, or somebody taking too many wives. And then, we had developed all that fallout. Mm-hmm. You'd experienced all the problems that came from enforcing the law your way.
Right.
And then we came to Willow Bluff in like session 10. I really think that y'all would have laid down your guns.
I think so too.
And just walked away.
I do too. Well, I think it is possible, and this is the risk that you were talking about. I think it's possible that, not necessarily with the players that we were playing with, but maybe another group, that some people would be like, no, I'm more ingrained in this faith, and I am more sure of what I'm supposed to do, and so I am going to do all of these things, these terrible, terrible things, because I am so much more sure of my faith. I've already gone through all of these other things. And that's the fear that you're talking about.
Yeah.
But with the people that we were playing with, I do think that we would have been like, no, bye. Sorry, dogs, I'm done. My mission was to become a dog to find a wealthy husband. I found him. I'm done. Bye. See ya. Like, I really think that's what would have happened with the people that we were playing with. But you're right. I think there's that risk that those littler missions just ingrain it further and further until you get to that big mission and you're like, oh, yeah, I'm totally capable of, mass genocide or whatever.
Yeah.
It is.
And so yeah, that is the core of my question is this game about the disconnect between what the player wants to do and what your character wants to do, which is what I always thought it was and what I taught about it in my class? Or is it about making characters that want to go out and upset the status quo, in which I don't necessarily see the support for that in the text based on the dogs' backgrounds between the setting canon? Or is it about the growth from one to the other, where, as Vincent says, if all of this was true, would I still think it's bullshit? And I think you have to assume that, the game is being played by people with best intentions, mm-hmm. I think. Which is where I think most people would. I think most people would eventually, I think that would be part of the fun in the campaign of this, would be starting out with that disparity and finding your breaking point and saying, no, my dog is not going to do this anymore. I don't care how much they put their lives into the faith or how much they believe in the faith or understand the risk that they're taking. They wouldn't be a part of this anymore.
Right. Yeah.
Which I think could be really powerful.
So we had a character in our game that after our mission canonically left being a dog because of what happened. It was so it was such a moment for them that they were like, yeah, this is not for me. This is not my faith. I can't do this anymore. That is a part like of our game canonically. We just didn't do another session for it.
So I guess what I'm saying is I love this game and I don't know if I can play it again.
Yeah. I would totally play it again because, again, that ending was terrible, but it was incredible.
It really was like a Nicholas Winding Refn film. It was so dark and powerful. And I think as long as you are playing with people who want to explore that disparity and don't want to revel in power fantasy, this is a game that can do that really beautifully and really wonderfully and deserves to be played in that space. I feel very powerfully about this game.
So recommendation with an asterisk?
Yes. I wonder what would happen if, and this would be potentially my solution to the problem, if dogs were not Judge Dredd style ultimate authority sheriffs, but were instead essentially performing community service to right some transgression against the faith. You could easily keep everything else in this instance. The idea that the faith really is right and that demonic is a danger, but we would know going in that our characters disagreed with the faith at one point and could again. So if being a dog was essentially, it could even still be like a position of high stature and trust in the faith. But if it was something that you did because you messed up at some point and you transgressed.
That's what you mean.
Yeah.
I was confused. I thought you meant like you're going in and like teaching classes instead of murdering people.
No, you would still do the exact same job, but you got signed on to be a dog because you transgressed the faith in some way. You failed the faith in some way, and this was your reparation.
I think that would solve the problem.
To me, that would solve the problem entirely because it would give us just that little bit of doubt in the setting that our characters would have the ability to rebel.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. On to our next segment, Return with the Elixir. I, again, enjoyed this setting because we don't get to play in it very often, but this reminded me a lot of the Magnificent Seven, but kind of less from a religious, like, zealot standpoint, but from, like, a social justice, we're going to do what we need to make sure that this town is the way it needs to be kind of way. So, yeah, Magnificent Seven is my Return with the Elixir because I have almost zero. Wavy line 0.
I see another one there.
Yeah, there's another one, but it's not really any different. So
you want to talk about it? You want to lump them together?
True Grit. I saw the movie. I saw the movies.
I think True Grit is good because True Grit's at least the remake. We watched the remake with Jeff Bridges. It's pretty dark. Yeah, it's a lot about questioning your morality and dealing with that. I think True Grit's actually a pretty darn good reference point.
Yeah, it's just the only one I have. So, Wavy line 0, reference points for this.
I'm going to try not to talk for another 30 minutes.
I believe in you.
But for films, I want to reiterate the films of Nicholas Winding Refn. Our game played out like if Nicholas Winding Refn did a Western. So particularly the films Valhalla Rising and Drive. Our game was so similar to those two movies, and I don't know how it happened. And it was dark and painful and lovely, and I highly recommend those. I also want to recommend a visual novel video game that I think does this very well. It is called We Know the Devil. It is a game about queer magical girls in a summer camp for Christian soldiers. 3 friends are trying to survive the night, and you are forced as the player to exclude one of the 3 friends on the premise that in a group of 3, one will always be left out, even if only slightly. So this is also a game that forces you to make a decision that you, the player, hate for the sake of this religious ideal. You're forced to, as characters, enforce the religious dogma. But because you are essentially at a reform school, you've gotten in trouble, which is why you're in the bad camp. Eventually, as you're replaying the game and you unlock more options, you have the opportunity to say, no, fuck this. This is wrong. We're not going to play by these rules anymore, which is kind of how I feel Dogs is trying to get at.
Yeah.
And We Know the Devil is amazing and everyone should play it. And music-wise, I used a lot of music from the video game Bastion, as well as the Red Dead Redemption soundtrack for our game, and I thought it worked very well.
It did. It was very good. So what's a story you'd like to tell with this game? Different than the one we did, obviously. But.
So ever since I first read Dogs in the Vineyard, I have wanted to pit the dogs against heretical or reformist dogs. I even decided that they would be called the Pride, and they called themselves lions instead of dogs. And that was my idea in like 2010 that I really wanted to do, and then just never got around to doing it. And I think now, after playing this game, I want to do it even more. Back then, I just thought it would be fun, like, to have gunfights between these two different groups. Mm-hmm. And now I'm like, no, there needs to be a heretical reformist group who wants to fight back against all the shitty things that the dogs do.
Yeah.
And now I want to do this so badly.
Yeah.
I think it could potentially be really powerful.
I think it'd be really interesting to play with an entire ensemble of newbies. Like, this is the whole team, this is their very first mission, and they are faced with something that is morally ambiguous, like something that's not very clear cut for them within their own religion. Something that maybe a veteran would have a clear idea of how to handle, but because they're new, they don't know how to handle it. They're the experts in the area. What do they do? I think that would be really interesting.
Is there anything else you want to say about Dogs in the Vineyard?
I liked it. You should play it.
It's...
with an asterisk.
Yeah, it's so good and so powerful. And I want to play it again. But I don't know if I want to feel that way again.
That's valid. We played a dark game. It was dark.
I'm at a point where I don't watch Nicholas Winding Refn movies anymore. I watch Parks and Rec for 100 times because I need the joy. The Farrier's Bellows is a production of The Gauntlet. You can find The Gauntlet on Twitter at GauntletRPG. You can find us on our website at gauntlet-rpg.com, and we are on Patreon at patreon.com/gauntlet, where you can contribute to The Gauntlet and support more great shows like ours.
Thank you to our editor, Zach B., for making this show listenable. Also, you can find us on iTunes. Please rate and subscribe to us. We would really, really appreciate it.
You can follow us on Twitter at Farrier's Bellows. Talk to us and talk about us. We would love to hear your thoughts on the show and on this game. You can follow me on Twitter at ZWGarth.
And me at ICDiana. Until next time, you cannot dream yourself into a character. You must hammer and forge yourself into one.
Remember to always carry your anointed earth.